Good evening, everyone. I'm Sheriff Ron Montgomery, and first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight to this community forum on school safety. We have a lot of topics that we're going to present tonight. Just to kind of give you an idea of how it's going to go, around the room you'll see monitors. If you can't see the ones up front, you'll be able to see whatever is being displayed. It'll be on all the monitors simultaneously. I'll be doing some talking, the school will be doing some talking. We're going to pass it back and forth. We're going to go through this presentation before we take questions from you. So hopefully we'll be able to answer a lot of your questions, but if not, obviously that's why we're here, is to hear from you and provide you hopefully the answers that you're looking for to make you aware of how hard we're working to keep the students in the York County School Division safe. I have some people I want to introduce. First of all, from the York County Board of Supervisors, the chairman of the Board of Supervisors, Mr. Steve Roan, is here tonight. From my staff, I have to my right Captain Jeffrey Kerr, who's the Community Services commander for me, and he's in charge of the school resource officers, and he's our liaison with the school division. And from his staff is Lieutenant Jeff Charvel, who's seated over there, who works with the schools. And newly appointed to the school this year right now is Sergeant Larry McKay. He just started working in the schools here recently. Captain Jason Houston is here from the Uniform Patrol Division. And in the back is Captain David Bark, who's with our Administrative Services Division. So that's my staff. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Shandor.
Thank you, Sheriff. First of all, thank you so much for attending this event. It's extremely important that you're here tonight, and we're glad to be able to share and really showcase our collaboration that we have within the schools. I did want to share as we get started, if you don't know, I have 3 children in our schools. Well, let me correct myself. I have 2 kids in our schools. My daughter's a sophomore now in college, but I have a junior at Tabb High School, and I have an 8th grader at Tabb Middle School. So I think that's important for parents to hear because yes, I'm the superintendent, but I'm also a dad who has the same concerns, worries, and all of the things that you feel and that you have when certain situations happen. I certainly want to share that I've been in this business, so to speak, for 31 years in public education. This is my 24th year as an administrator. I've worked in Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia. And what I want to share with you is, with all those experiences and all those years, I can easily recognize an ineffective relationship with the local police force and an effective relationship with the police force. And I can tell you, in working in all those states and all those years, this is by far the best collaboration, the most open communication. We typically call each other by our first names. We have each other's phone numbers. We contact each other all the time. We train together. There's a lot of training that we do. The Sheriff's Office helps us with a number of trainings, and we in turn do the same thing. So I think we're in a really good situation here. I also want to introduce some of my staff members. So to my left is Dr. Carroll. He's our Chief Operations Officer. Dr. Aaron Butler. He's our Director of Student Services. Who else do I have here? I did forget my board members, which is the number one rule as a superintendent. You shouldn't do that. So I have Mr. Jimmy Richardson, who is in the back. Jimmy, if you'll raise your hand. Jimmy actually worked with the Sheriff's Office for
36 years.
Only 36 years. And we have Miss Kim Goodwin, who is our school board chair. Kim, if you'll raise your hand. And I also have Mr. Pavich. He could raise his hand. He's a school board member as well. Thank you for coming tonight. And then I have some additional staff members in the front row. So Mr. Dolak, if you'll please just stand and raise your hand. This is Greg Dolak. He is over all of our operations and facilities, and he's also over safety and security. We have Michelle Huffstedler, if she'll please stand. She is our Director of Leadership. She basically supervises all 19 principals and assistant principals and does a lot of work throughout the division with communication through various departments. Ms. Cheryl Parr, if you'll please stand. Cheryl is an Associate Director in our Student Services Department, and she works very closely with the Sheriff's Office staff members as well. She also works with the Military Liaison, Sodexo, nurses, military. She does a lot. If you don't remember, Cheryl Parr was the principal at Tabb Elementary for a number of years. And finally, last but not least, is Mr. Kyle Hahn. If you'll please raise your hand. If Kyle looks familiar, Kyle worked for the Sheriff's Office for 30 years. We've worked really closely with Kyle through the years on a number of different situations. He's been a wonderful liaison between the Sheriff's Office and the school division. All right, so let's talk about why we're here tonight. So if you'll look at this slide, we've sent out a number of communications related to a number of threat investigations. So when you look at those slides, I think it's very important to understand and just notice what the trend is right off the bat. So at elementary school, you could see the majority of those are verbal threats. And you have to remember the ages of kids in pre-K through 5th grade, right? Of course, when you get to our secondary schools, the majority of those are social media threats. And we're going to get into that a lot tonight. So I felt like it was important to give you just a short picture of why we're here. This is another reason why we're here tonight. So I'm going to give you just 3 very quick examples on what some of these things look like that we get. And we want to make sure we're about as transparent as we can. So I'm going to pass the microphone really quickly to Kyle Hahn, and he's going to talk to you about this first picture on the left.
This first one you see here started in our schools, in the high schools, about a week or so ago. And what you probably can't see is there's a list of school names on there. If you scroll through them, which I did, which took a little bit of time, this was found on TikTok. There's over 500 school names on there. The last 3 is what the kids focused on, or the third to the last after going through all of it.
There were 500, correct?
Yeah. York High School. And then you had one that said Bruton High for girls. But what the kids didn't focus in on is, this is out of the UK. So what the kids are doing, they're focusing on a school name, they're taking a screenshot of it, and then they're just making the rest of it. Now this has been floating around TikTok. They've had over 3 million views of this one. And of course, hundreds of thousands of likes and shares. But this is just some of the examples that we deal with when a threat comes in. It's either reported to an admin, or a kid tells another kid about it, or a parent may see it and they see a school name on there. Now we got to dig deeper. Okay, is it our school? Is it one in York County? And that's when we talk with the Sheriff's Office, and they kind of help dig through some of this to try and figure out, where did this originate from. So this is just one.
Yeah, just one example. It's also important to note that there's 2 other Yorks that are close by. There's a York, Pennsylvania, and there's a York, South Carolina. I typically get a lot of emails from parents in both districts, so if you've emailed me, thank you. But I have parents from other states in York that email me too, and it gets confusing a lot. You know, if I see a report, if somebody sends it to me, and first look it says York County bus da 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 da, I got to call somebody and figure out what's going on. Then it says York County, South Carolina. So it's really important. However, that one on the left caused many, many man-hours between the school system administrators as well as the Sheriff's Office. Now let's look at the picture on the right. So the picture on the right, what you're looking at is, I guess that's more of a text message with some links inside there. This was a situation, and I'm not going to divulge any personally identifiable information, but I will tell you that this one was basically, the root of this came from a school in Arkansas. So this one, a student grabbed, this got to them somehow. A student texted it to another student at 1:45 in the morning. So this is a high school student who had their phone and emailed it, or texted, at 1:45. Went to a child in the morning. And again, kids are sharing things and sharing information. Unfortunately, it was not only a high school, but it involved a middle school situation as well. This particular one on the right had nothing to do with York County whatsoever, at all. But what the result was, we had parents going to bus stops to pick their kids up and not send them to school at a middle school because it's causing such an alarm. So again, another situation that didn't originate or have anything to do with our district. I'm going to go through one more. This last one is on the left. It's a little blurry, so I'm going to read it to you. But I want to just set the context. We had an event last week called the Fireside Chat with the First Lady of Virginia. And she was with the author of the book, The Anxious Generation. It was wonderful, and we're going to be making that public for parents to see it. And if you're a parent of a child who you bought a phone for, you need to watch it. That's just my personal advice. While we were sitting there, it was about 9 o'clock at night, one of my high school principals received this text. So I'm going to read it for you. It says, "This is Anderson, and some kids might remember me. I'm 11th grader now, and I used to go to Hornsby. The Hornsby kids were B-word, and the teacher were A-word. So on Friday 9/20, I will pull up with Xander, Tyler, and Aiden, and we will run around attacking everyone we see, maybe even shooting. This will happen on 11:30 and end at 1 o'clock or until police stop us. If you're going to school tomorrow, then," and then there's like a little emoji there. So I think it's important that, again, you see sort of what we're dealing with. That particular text on the left, once it was shared, it spread all over the place. So now what you see on the right is at 2:50 a.m. Well, let me step back. Lieutenant Charvel actually worked the case with us. The principal got it at 9 o'clock. He happened to be, or we got you on the phone at 9 o'clock. We immediately sprung into action. We found out pretty quickly it was a WJCC student, and they were investigating. My understanding is they went to 55 houses in Williamsburg, James City, and all of this was deemed not credible. So I share these three examples with you just to start the night off with, so you understand. We take every threat extremely serious. And this is just three really quick examples. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to the sheriff, and he or Jeff is going to talk about some consequences.
All right. What we're looking at right now is the Virginia Code that if a threat is made, and I'll go through some of what's required for us to place charges in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we're not talking about an active shooter situation. These are the types of situations right now that involve this code that really was the impetus for us having this meeting tonight, because of the number that is really increasing. And just to give you a little bit of background, in the 21-22 school year in York County, we had 40 such threats that we had to investigate. 22-23 was 62. Last year it went down to 45, but this year, in the first couple of weeks of school, we've already had 10. And if you're reading or keeping up with the news, you'll see that this is not just a York County issue. It's all over the Commonwealth of Virginia and all over the United States. It's getting worse and worse. So one of the things that we talk a lot about when we go out into the community is cell phones, and how kids today don't really understand sometimes how quickly they can get themselves in trouble with these devices. So that, I mean, I have 3 kids. I have grandkids in the York County school system as well, and I understand the issue of sometimes at dinner time everybody's got their head down and they're not talking, they're on phones. Kids communicate the way we used to talk years ago in high school. They do it on phones. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but the concern that we have and what we really want to get across is, in the Commonwealth of Virginia, under the law, if you communicate a threat that you're going to shoot up a school or you're going to harm a school, and you hit the send button, once you've done that, you potentially committed a Class 6 felony in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I want people to understand this. We, the York-Poquoson Sheriff's Office, take every threat seriously. Regardless of whether we go out and somebody tries to tell us if it was a joke, it's not funny to the families that have actually experienced these types of things, where they've actually had their kids hurt or worse, killed, or had to go through these situations. There's nothing funny about this at all. And I want you to understand that my policy is, if we have a child that's of legal age that we can prosecute them, we're going to charge them if they hit that send button and send out some message like the one we had here recently where they said they were going to shoot up a school. Now, most of these, as we're talking about, fortunately, well, all of them in York County so far, when we look into them, these kids did this because they just weren't thinking. They were either going through some type of an emotional crisis, something happened that spurred them, something at school, an argument. I don't understand how it's getting to the point right now where we have to talk about firearms and shooting up schools as a way to release some of the tension. But if they do that, they need to understand the repercussions of what could happen, and they're going to be charged and potentially convicted of a Class 6 felony. So we're trying to get the word out now when we go to the schools, and the school resource officers talk about this all the time, and every opportunity we get when we have a group of kids, we explain to them how important it is to pay attention to what you're doing on that phone. Not only can they get themselves in trouble with this, but they can become victims of crimes, as most of you in this room have probably read, just as easily when they're doing these types of things on the internet. So please emphasize to your kids or your grandkids or your neighbors' kids, if you have the opportunity, that many years ago we used to talk about when email first came out, if you were mad, you'd sit down and type out something, and what was the golden rule? Don't hit that send button until you get up and walk away and come back. Well, these kids aren't thinking, and that's what's causing these issues across the country. Now, we're not looking at the numbers at some localities. I mean, I've talked to some of my peers in the state of Florida where they're talking about 50 or 60 of these a week. And I don't know that I condone this, but there's one particular sheriff in Volusia County, Florida, that's got an 11-year-old doing the perp walk, is what it's called, where he rolled him up in front of the media, got him out of the back of a police car in handcuffs for sending one of these messages, because they'd had 52 in 1 week. I certainly don't advocate that here, but I want you to understand that if we investigate this, and we are in constant contact with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, so we communicate back and forth. And in the Commonwealth of Virginia, there is no legal age for prosecution. Depending on the crime, any child could be prosecuted. We have some issues in court, obviously, but when we're talking about middle school or teenage kids and they start doing this type of thing, if they send that message, they could potentially be arrested. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about tonight, so that you see this code section, you understand what the elements are, you're threatening the school, you're putting the right kind of verbiage in there that you're going to shoot it up, and if you do that, they're potentially looking at a Class 6 felony. And we did charge one person already, and we charged several last year with these same offenses.
I'm going to ask Dr. Butler, who is pretty much our expert related to the student handbook, if he will share just a little bit about the right side of the slide. Dr. Butler?
If you look at the slide, you'll notice that there is a chart that kind of outlines for us the discipline consequences that occur in the school division. We're required by Virginia Code to make sure that every school in the Commonwealth has the same expectations at every school, and so our code of conduct mirrors the model policy that's provided by the Department of Education. One of the driving forces is to make sure that students are safe, and so we appreciate the partnership we have with the Sheriff's Department, but we are also required by code to make sure that we are addressing matters that come to the attention of school staff. One of the things that happened, unfortunately, I was here several years ago when they had the tragedy at Virginia Tech. And following that, the General Assembly passed legislation saying that every school division must have a threat assessment team at every school. And so one of the things that guides our actions with the Code of Conduct is at every school, whenever a threat is received, a threat assessment team, which must include a school administrator, it must include someone with expertise in school counseling, mental health, and if you do have an SRO in your building, it's required that they also participate on that team so that they can evaluate and review situations. And so after they have reviewed and evaluated the situation, then they make a determination of, is it a treatment issue? Do we need to refer the person for treatment? And also, what is the consequence that has to be given? So you can see in the chart, there is a range of consequences. Some matters are mental health and they get referred for services, and there's a lower consequence that's given. Other situations, it demands that there's a higher consequence given, all the way up to a 10-day recommendation for expulsion from the school board. So we look at every case by case, but we are very much informed by the data that is received by our teams at every school. All of our schools have to receive training from the Department of Criminal Justice Services. That's mandated by law. And all of our people in our division have been trained that serves on a team. We've actually been fortunate enough to have Dr. Dysinger, who works for the Department of Criminal Justice as a consultant. He also was the one that helped develop the threat assessment protocol for the state after the tragedy that happened at Virginia Tech. So we do work very closely with the Sheriff's Department on these matters, but our staff are trained in every building, and they assess things, like I said, on a case-by-case basis to make sure that, one, that your children are safe at school, but two, that the person who made the comment, that they do receive the interventions that are appropriate to help them in their situation.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. I just wanted to add one thing. If you're a parent and you're in here, you know that we send a lot of forms for you to sign each year. What I did want to share this evening is we have about 13,200 students in our school division. As of today, we have 4,452 students who have not had their parent or legal guardian sign the student code of conduct. So basically, that's a third of our families have not done that yet. So that's certainly a concern. So we will be working through that over the next week or so. I believe the Code of Virginia 22.1-279.3 talks about parental responsibility and involvement requirements. And there's a section in there that says each parent of a student shall sign and return to the school in which the student is enrolled a statement acknowledging the receipt of the school board standards of student conduct, the notice of the requirements of this section, and the compulsory school attendance law. So that's something that parents have to sign each year. All right, so I will now turn it over to Dr. Carroll, who is going to talk about our multi-tiered approach to safety.
All right, thank you, Dr. Shandor. And before I get started, I want to share what Dr. Shandor did earlier tonight. I've been in 3 states, 3 different school divisions, had positive partnerships with law enforcement in all 3, but this one is unparalleled. And just such a close relationship, sharing of resources and information really does help us do our job better. So when we talk about safety, a lot of people think about just one thing: how do you harden the campus, locking the doors, keeping people out, and those types of processes. There's actually a lot more that goes into it. So I'm going to talk about each of these. There's basically 5 points. The first one is the proactive planning that we do and the processes that we put in place. And a lot of those processes evolve over years, but that planning is rooted in the school safety audit that we do every year. Then there's preventative measures that we put in place that hopefully that we don't get things like threats, but some of them we can stop. Dr. Butler just talked about the threat assessment procedures. I'll go into those a little more. Then of course we do safety drills all the time. I know you're aware of those. And then we use technology assistance to help us. So first of all, to give you a context to what's happening in the schools is, I'm going to jump down to the last bullet on this slide, is that we do, and are mandated by the state, we did it before the state mandated it, but we do a school climate, which is a measure of the students, a survey with the students, and working condition surveys with our staff. And there is a common question in both of those surveys, and it's, do you feel safe, or is the school safe for you to work and learn? It's on a 6-point scale, 6 being strongly agree, 5 being agree, 4 being slightly agree. Now this data is not from last year, it's a year before because we're still waiting for last year's. However, the students answered 4.9 out of 6. The instructors 5.2 and other staff 5.48. So that's a cluster of answers around 5, which is agree to the statement that they feel safe in the schools. And it's a good place to be. And that's important before you start thinking about all the other things that we do. As I said, we haven't gotten the results from last year's, but we added additional security measures last year, so we would expect for those scores to stay the same or get better, and we'll report those out as soon as we get them. So other planning processes are the school safety audit that I mentioned a little bit, and then student supervision. Teachers should be out in the halls looking at how students are moving in the building and observing their behavior on a regular basis. Other processes that we have is every school has a crisis management plan. And you see an example of one of the pages, and it has everything from a fire to an airplane crash to a gas leak. I mean, every possible safety thing that we can think of, and it's a script for the administrators to work down. And there's parts for the school board office leadership and for the principal and their staff at the school. We also, as I mentioned earlier, have a wonderful multi-agent collaboration, and that's not just with the YPSO, but also fire and life safety. We have mandatory employee training, and we do student conduct code assemblies at least once a year, and a lot of them do it twice a year. And then we move into other preventative measures, and this is what I was mentioning earlier about hardening our schools, is all the exterior doors are locked. All of the classroom interior doors are locked, and the offices and other places. There are some that are open, like in the media center and whatnot, but for the most part, the majority of the interior doors are locked on a regular basis. And I think it was about a year ago, 2 years ago, we finished our last security vestibule so that all of our schools have a security vestibule, which helps when you're checking in as a parent, and kind of slows the process down a little bit, which I know you don't appreciate when you're in a hurry to get your kid, but it's certainly there to help slow down anybody that would have bad intention. Furthermore, with preventative measures, a couple of years ago, last year, we put together 2 paired strategies at our outdoor stadiums, Bailey Field and one up at Bruton High, and also certain indoor activities that meet a criteria. And those 2 procedures were clear bags paired with metal detection. Now, we made that decision because we've got a lot of people in a confined space. We have a lot of people that aren't ordinarily part of the school day, and also emotions can run high at an athletic event. So those were the 3 reasons, and the clear bags are intended to help the process of getting through the metal detectors, because you have to check those ones that are indicated by the metal detector, and then you have to have additional staff to help work that technology. So speaking of staff, we have added a good bit of staff to the purpose of school security over the last few years. And Dr. Shandor introduced Mr. Hahn at the end of the table earlier. He is now our coordinator of school safety. Dr. Shandor already talked about his experience in law enforcement and with our schools. And so he was the perfect choice for us to fill this position. And one of the biggest things he brings to us is both his experience, his eye for what's happening, and he is our quality control person to make sure that we have better consistency in all these processes that we talked about. We also have had 4 SROs in the high schools over the years, and we expanded that to have 1 in each of the middle schools. I think we phased it up 2, and then the other 2 a couple of years ago. So now we have 1 SRO for every secondary school. And then last year, we introduced 12 school security officers across all of the secondary schools, 2 at each high school, 1 at each middle school. So that's a significant investment in staff to make sure that they can monitor the schools and help them be orderly, and also to help with our preventative measures. And then I'll pass it to the chair.
Yep. If you want to do the last bullet, and then I believe you have the next slide.
So the last bullet that we're going to talk about is something that was implemented last year right after the tragedy at Rich Neck Elementary School. I had just become the sheriff, and I was receiving a lot of calls, and rightfully so, from the community about what are we doing in York County? What is the sheriff's office doing to make the schools safer? So we don't have SROs in the elementary schools right now, so what I implemented was that on day shift, the patrol division has been given the edict that they have to have the deputies go by the schools on a regular basis, the elementary schools, introduce themselves to the staff there. But we also took it a step further, and this picture is one of the times that Dr. Shandor and I started it by going in each and every elementary school and reading to the kids and starting to interact with them and getting to know the people there. Well, to be perfectly honest, when I started this program of having the deputies go to the schools on a regular basis, my main concern was making the school staff and the families feel a little bit safer seeing that the deputies were there. Initially, the interesting thing was, since I guess we weren't that used to it, I was receiving a lot of calls of what's going on at the school. There's deputies there at the school, I'm worried. So once they got used to it, if the deputies weren't there for a day or two because they were busy, then it was, why hasn't my deputy been to the school? But the long range, the long range benefit of us starting this program that I started to see the more I went to the school was the relationship between the kids and the deputies. I mean, when the deputies come in there now and they get to know them, they're like rock stars to these kids. They go out, not only do they read with them, but they play with them on the playground, and they're developing relationships that I hope are going to last over years and years and build a great relationship between law enforcement and these young kids. But as fact that the security is increased there is the deputies, if they have a report to write, they're told to find the elementary school in their district, write it so they're visible there, get out and patrol the grounds if they're there, walk around, be visible, be interactive with the staff and with the kids. And I think that that's a huge benefit as far as the security to the elementary schools. And we've received a lot of pluses from the families, not only of the kids, but the school staff as well. So we're going to continue that, and hopefully they'll be on the school grounds more than they've ever been this year.
Thank you, Sheriff. Again, my name is Jeff Kerr. I'm the captain of Community Services Division, and I oversee the SRO program. First, Dr. Shandor, I was the SRO at Tabb High School in the mid-90s, and the SRO program had a lot different face on it back then. We didn't deal with a lot of the problems we deal with now, and we were basically people who roamed the halls, told kids to go to class, and made sure the building was safe. To give Kyle full credit, with the assistance of Lieutenant Jeff Charville, they really took that program to the next level, where they developed a very comprehensive program for the SROs, raising the expectations, raising the training standards, and also they were responsible for introducing our lockdown drill program. We probably do a more comprehensive lockdown program, drill program, than any other school in Virginia. And thank you, Kyle and Jeff, for doing that. Coming to the division, I certainly have big shoes to fill. And Kyle, thank you very much for setting up a program that I work every day to keep that standard up and to improve it. Certainly, Dr. Shandor's staff helps me with that every day too, and I thank you. Our SROs, particularly in the high schools and the middle schools, are an active and very important part of the administrative team. I think Dr. Shandor would agree that that relationship inside those buildings with the principals and the assistant principals communicating on a daily basis about activities in school and activities outside of school are very important to keeping an eye on what's going in our buildings, the trends that are going in our buildings, and how we communicate and interact with these kids. It's super important to keep doing that every single day. Dr. Carroll and Dr. Butler talked about the threat assessment team too. So I just want to touch on our role in that a little bit. There are very few exceptions to the Code of Virginia where we are permitted to share juvenile crime information with people outside of law enforcement. School threat assessments are one of those. My expectation of Lieutenant Charville and his staff is to attend all of those threat assessments. It's usually automatic in the high schools and middle schools as required by law, but we want to do those in the elementary schools too. And my expectation is that our staff takes the police report involved in this situation and any criminal history information that's available to us to that threat assessment team so we get a comprehensive look and a big picture of what's going on with this child. So please know that we take it very seriously, and there's a lot of information that we gather outside the school that we generally, well, we have to be very cautious about what we share because of privacy laws. That threat assessment team and that threat assessment activity absolutely give us the opportunity to collaborate to have the best positive outcome for the child, the school, and our community. Another expectation of me and the SRO program is to communicate crime trends and activities that are going outside the school. Captain Houston's division spends a lot of time dealing with these kids in the evenings and on the weekends. That relationship kind of goes back and forth. He lets us know when there's things that are going to affect the schools the next day. I often get calls at midnight, 2 in the morning saying, hey, we've had this incident go on in Bethel Manor tonight. We thought you need to be aware. We make those phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning. Dr. Butler's phone often rings late at night with me calling him so that we can prevent a situation at the school the next morning. You too, Mrs. Parr. And we try to do that the other way too, and it's become more prevalent here recently. especially with these text messages and social media threats we're getting, what we saw pretty quickly was that our patrol division was getting calls after school hours and after my staff went home, where parents all of a sudden see this, and we're getting 10, 15, 20 calls relating to the same incident. So what my expectation of my staff is that we communicate with the patrol division so that they are prepared for these messages when they go to work at 6:00 p.m. so that we're not wasting time and resources for problems that we've already identified. So thank you, Captain Houston, for your cooperation with that too. A little stuff you talk about that just seems like the everyday mundane task, but it's really important is my expectation of the SROs, when they get to that building every day, they better know every nook and cranny, every door, what door number is where, and if they identify problems or see things that compromise school security or safety, that they identify that. Kyle and Greg Dolak's area within the school division are absolutely 100% cooperating with us on that. If I call and say the door striker on A10 at Grafton High School is bad, they make sure that gets fixed right away because we care about your kids and we don't want people coming in that building who are not authorized to. Another part of the SRO program that's pretty important is the education piece of this. And not only do our SROs walk around, protect kids and charge them with crimes and do threat assessments, but I want them engaging and teaching them about what the law is and what the consequences are for breaking those laws. Virginia has a program called the Virginia Rules. All of our high school and middle school SROs teach that to their classes every single year. And it's a great opportunity for us to let them know what to expect if they decide to make bad decisions. So that is very important. The biggest thing, I think, and I think Sheriff Montgomery drives this forward every single day, is our SROs are the core of our community policing program. Each school, especially at Grafton Complex, I don't know if anybody knows this, but Grafton Complex is the #1 largest occupied building on any given day in York County. It's its own little community, and the community policing that goes on that building every day is vital. And us engaging these kids, staff members, teachers, guests, visitors, parents, every day is an important part of us keeping that school safe and us identifying problems before they become big problems.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, and Dr. Carroll's going to share a little bit about technology.
Right, so we have certain technologies that assist us in this multi-layered approach to the school. The first one is school cameras. I'm sure you've heard about those. We have 890 cameras division-wide across all of our schools. And then when you look at our buses, there are 3 cameras on each of the buses. That's over 100 buses that are on the road every day. So now we're talking 1,100 cameras that are being employed to help us. We also have the IdentiKid visitor system so that people are signing in, and that has a background check piece to that. We also have, I mentioned earlier, the A-phone access control system that we buzzed in. We were an early adopter of that system early on here on the peninsula. And then the 800 megahertz radios, which I think we expanded about 8 or 9 years ago, that gives us instantaneous communication ability. We have a general channel that we can talk between the schools to the school board office. We can get directly to 911. You don't even have to pick up the phone. You can just call 911, which is always being monitored in the 911 center. And our transportation uses the same system. And those radios are so powerful they'll reach well outside of the county. So we don't have any concern that signal is not going to get out and the schools can't get supported instantaneously from sharing that. And with that, I'm going to give the microphone back to the superintendent.
Thank you, Dr. Carroll. So I did want to talk a little bit about Report It and Let's Talk. So I think it's important for parents to know some of the details of this program and how it works with us. So you could access this on the website, or you could access it through the app. Just by show of hands, who has the app, the YCSD app? Raise your hand. Oh, it's wonderful. You have it too, sir. That's wonderful. All right, if you don't have it, you should get it. It's wonderful, especially if you don't know if it's an A or a B day. It helps me all the time. All right. So with that said, obviously if there's a threat or an emergency, please call 911. If you use the Report It, we have a Report It hotline, and that number is on there, 757-890-5000. But what most people don't know is when you call and leave that message, it automatically creates a let's talk dialogue. So when you call and leave that message, it creates a dialogue, and that is immediately sent to three people in the room. It will go to Dr. Carroll, it will go to Doug Hartley, Dr. Hartley who's not here, and Ms. Parr. Now, what folks have to understand, there's also certain terms where if you say certain terms or type certain terms in there, there's 100 different terms that are recognizable. It will then go to 16 or 17 of us, I believe. So, and when the Let's Talks come to us, it will be in red. So if you write the word threat, if you write the word gun, if you write the word, what's another example, Dr. Butler? Weapon. You write those words, the system automatically picks them up in red, and then it's sent to many of us, and we get on those immediately. The other thing is the reported program is extremely detailed. So you'll have places in there where you could enter what's the concern, was there a weapon involved, and it gives you various things to check, where it happened, when it happened, were there victims there. If you have pictures or if your child shares pictures with you, you could upload those pictures and send those in to us, so we'll have all that information. It's extremely important that adults and students report information to us as fast as possible. Again, if it's something that you deem as an emergency, call 911 or call the sheriff's office. Again, these guys are staffed 24 hours a day where our schools aren't. But again, hopefully that helps parents understand when you do call, we get that information and it's sent immediately to a number of people in written form as well.
All right, Dr. Carroll, I think you have the staff drills.
Yes, sir. So another layer to our approach is the drilling that we do. And I'm reminded of a saying that I heard a long time ago. People don't rise to the occasion, they rise to the level of their training. And so we drill for things. And so we do all sorts of safety drills, fire drills, earthquake drills. But the important one that we're here to talk about tonight is the lockdown drill. And each school has to do 2 in the first 20 days. And then after the first 60 days, we conduct 4 annually. And that is also coordinated with the sheriff's office. And once again, in my history of working in schools, I was a principal for 10 years, never once saw a law enforcement agent at my school while I ran a drill. It was all up to us, and yet that's the rare exception for us. We've always got coordination with this office, and we dearly appreciate it. And now I want to pass it on to the sheriff to talk about one of our training opportunities or experiences.
So last year, I put together with my staff an operation or training operation called Operation Falcon. It was held at York High School. One of the things that I was concerned about is Fire and Life Safety, the York-Poquoson Sheriff's Office, and the school division all train on a regular basis for active shooter events, but we had never put together an operation where we tested our ability to work together and how that would work out in a real life situation. Hopefully we'll never have to know that. But we simulated it at York High School last August and learned a lot of things from it. The drill couldn't have got any better. We had kids from the drama department that came and simulated some injuries so the fire department could do some triage work. We had a simulated drill inside the school that was about as real as it could get. Most of the people that I talked to afterwards could really understand the stress of it, but it gave us the opportunity to understand what each person's role is in a unified command situation and how we would respond. But the one thing that I really want to talk about is the reunification process. And when I look at situations across the country, that's where a lot of the problems develop between the community and law enforcement, fire and life safety that are there. And I realize there's no way in the world that I don't want to ever say I understand how somebody feels that's been through that, because that's not possible unless you've been through it. But from our perspective, there's a couple of things I want to touch on. There is a reunification plan that the Sheriff's Office, the School Division, and Fire and Life Safety work on all the time, and there's a reason for it. And take a high school, for the size of York High School, is there 800 or 900 students there? We have to account for each and every one of these kids. So some of the places that I've talked to, where I've talked to law enforcement leaders where things really started to go south, is when families start to show up, there's no real plan, kids start to leave with family members and no documentation of it. And the problems that causes is later on, law enforcement has to go back through a 100,000 square foot building and start making sure by opening cabinet doors and closet doors that we've accounted for each and every person there. So there is a plan. We actually used this plan several years ago. I don't know if anybody remembers this. There was a gas leak at Magruder Elementary School in the upper part of the county, and we had to evacuate the entire school, and we took them to Bruton High School. And it worked out really well. The parents cooperated, they showed up, they showed us ID, you were matched with your child, we took a picture of that, so there was no question as to who went with who at the end of the day, and all the students were accounted for. That's just as important if we have a tragedy, which I hope we never have to work through. But one of the other things that I really want to talk about is how important it is, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a couple of slides, for you to listen to some of the information that's coming out from not only the school's PIO, but the Sheriff's Office PIO as well. We're going to give you as much up-to-date information as we can if there's a tragedy or if there's anything going on at a school that requires evacuation. And the reason for that is, if you show up at the school, and if it is the worst case scenario, the more people that show up outside of the school, you're going to take away resources from the sheriff's office that may be used to mitigate what's going on inside the building. It could slow that process down if we have lots of people showing up. Now I've got to direct traffic depending on where the school is. We have to keep parents from going into the school. You need to understand that when the building goes into lockdown, regardless of what the issue it is, there will be no access to the school until we release it and everybody's safe and everybody's accounted for. Now, I understand sitting in this room where there's not emotions involved, it's one thing to talk about it, but in the real world, if it gets emotional like that, and I've seen some scenarios, and you've probably seen them on the news as well, where it gets out of hand, it makes things chaotic, it makes our job tougher, but also it takes away from our ability to mitigate the problem quicker. So please rely on the fact that we're going to give you the information you need as fast as we can get it. You're going to be given instructions as to where to go to pick up your kids, and we're going to try to do it in as orderly and as expeditiously as we possibly can, because I know you want to get a hold of your kids. I certainly understand that. But it's important to understand that there is a process for reunification.
Okay, and the next layer to our approach is the threat assessment teams. And Dr. Butler and Captain Kerr have already commented on it. So I just want to kind of reiterate what the importance of those teams are. That when you're doing a threat assessment, there's two questions you're trying to answer. How credible and serious is the threat itself? And to what extent does the threatener appear to have the resources, intent, and or motivation to carry it out? Now, we have some statistics of the threat assessments that we've done so far this year. Now, this includes the three categories of threat assessment, or how we track the numbers. There's threats to self, threats to others, and threats to self and others. Now, threats to self are self-harm, and they can include suicide. And we've had 35 in the first 20 days of school. And some of that's coming off of summer, but some of it's also just where we are right now. Now, you might be thinking the math doesn't math here, right? Dr. Shandor shared 16 threats earlier tonight. That's because we do more threat assessments than somebody who just says a weapon or a gun or some sort of mortal harm. Other types of threats get threat assessments also, including the threats to self. So we've had 35 so far. And you'll also see that they're categorized, and the vast majority of them are no risk or low risk. And that should indicate that we take these very serious, we do our due diligence, and we're making sure that whenever we hear something or it's reported that there's some sort of threat, then we are looking into that child, trying to find out what's happening with the law enforcement and mental health support, and seeing if there's something we can do to either mitigate the threat and or to support the child. I'll pass it back to Dr. Shannon.
All right, thank you. And the sheriff mentioned this earlier. He mentioned the lockdown. It's important, and many of you, if you're a parent in here and you've received any of these messages, especially the hold in place or modified lockdown. Will you just raise your hand? Wonderful. So you're familiar with sort of what I'm talking about. So most often you'll get the hold in place alert from your principal, and typically that's related to something that's happening inside the building. It's typically a medical emergency, whether it's with a child or with a staff member. We'll put a hold in place on so that we can get the fire and life safety folks in there to make sure that we can get to the people who need help and then transport them if they need transported. The next one is a modified lockdown, and that is when there's a potential safety threat outside of the building. So we've had situations where we'll be contacted by the sheriff's office at a particular location, whether it's Bethel Manor, Coventry, wherever, that they're pursuing someone who did something in the community and they're near the school. We will go on a modified lockdown. We'll continue having the regular schedule, but entry and exit to the building is going to be restricted. The next one is lockdown, which is what Dr. Carroll mentioned earlier, when there's a potential threat inside the building. So entry and exit to the school will be restricted as well. And then the last one would be evacuation. And as the sheriff mentioned earlier, this could be for a number of reasons. It could be for, as he mentioned, a gas leak. It could be a tornado. It could be a weather-related. There could be a fire or a safety concern. So there's a number of reasons why we may need to evacuate the school and then reunify in another location. And I appreciate that the sheriff mentioned the reunification plan, and I'm going to turn it over to him in just a minute. But Mr. Dolak, who's sitting in the front row, who I mentioned earlier, we have the resources necessary. We have a special trailer that has everything you would possibly think you need inside to put at a reunification site, whether it's cones, whether it's, what else is in there, Greg? Vests and manuals, safety manuals, radios, iPads. So there's a number of resources that are already there, and the people who run the reunification are staff members at the school board office. So we don't expect a school to run it. We come out and we run it because the school staff they'll have their own roles and the administrators will have their roles as well. All right, so let me turn it over to the sheriff.
Unification obviously is a long drawn-out process, depending on how many kids we're dealing with in the location. So please listen to the school PIO, the sheriff's office PIO. The information is being sent to you by text. Use the apps that we've talked about to get the information, and understand that there is a process. We have to make sure that every child is located, every child is identified to be going with someone they're supposed to be going with. So please work with us on that, and it'll make the system go a whole lot faster. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. I want to talk to you a little bit about school-home communications. So I think it's important that we work through these because you can see what our priorities are. Our priorities are obviously students and staff safety. The harder part of when we're dealing or working through a situation is fact gathering. And fact gathering, depending on the situation, it could be really easy or that could be extremely complicated. So we work again with the sheriff's office. They're investigating. Our administrators are helping to investigate to make sure we gather facts. The other part is before we communicate, we want to make sure that we are accurate. We don't want to send information out to the families and then 1 minute later find out that information was wrong. And we also want to make sure that we're informed as we're making these decisions. So we set up what we call incident command when we have a situation, have a number of staff members in there. We have liaisons that go to the school. We have a communication process. So as we're working to gather information, we're typically writing, at 7:30 we received this, at 7:37 this came in, this is the information we have. So it takes some time to gather that. And while I'm talking about time, during a high pressure situation, it's really important to understand the difference between real time and psychological time. Because sometimes I'm in a situation in the room and I'll say, when is Dolak going to call us? Like, what's going on? What is he doing? And then my team members will say, it's been 2 minutes. So it's important that we communicate really well with each other, but also understand we've got to give folks time to gather that information, if that makes sense. Next would be our processes. Obviously, we're trying to determine the scope of the situation. We also want to identify impacted families. So I have a couple examples I want to share related to communication. So if there's two 5-year-olds out on the playground and a situation happens, and one of the students comes in and reports it or tells their parent at home related to that situation, typically the administrator can work through that situation with those two families, right? And we wouldn't have to send out a whole school communication for what those two 5th graders talked about. Again, everything is situation dependent. We have situations on buses that happens from time to time. Students will say a certain thing, or there may be a text message or whatnot. It's the same thing. We had a situation today on a bus. There was a particular route where a situation happened. We communicated just to that bus route. Didn't make sense to communicate to the whole school. We try to communicate to who those folks are to make sure they're receiving that information with that direct communication. And then again, there's other situations that happen where we know we need to communicate to the school. Typically, and we look at, we want to communicate as much as we can and be as transparent as we can without causing undue harm. Hopefully that makes sense. So when you think about that, what we often get questions about is, well, they're not telling us everything. Why isn't the school sharing this information? What are they hiding? Well, the reality is there's certain things that we have to limit in our communications, and I think it's really important for parents and community members to understand this. The first one is the scope of the situation. You know, we're working with the law enforcement and they're in the middle of a criminal investigation. There's certain information that we cannot share yet related to the situation. We may be able to say something happened here and this is the time it happened and here's what we're continuing to look into, but we can't give you all the details on that because we would be interfering with the police investigation. Also, thinking about legal and privacy considerations. We have parents call us and say, I know exactly who the kid is, why didn't you tell the whole community who the kid is? And the answer to that is, well, we have FERPA, so we can't share that information. The other thing you want to say is, would you want your child's name out there if they made a poor decision or said something bad? The other thing we can't share is the consequences to the behavior. We have many parents that call us or call our principals who want to have a conversation related to, well, did they get suspended? Did they get expelled? We cannot share that information. But if you're a parent in this school division, you've probably received several of these that say from either, I know Barbara Nagel's here and a few other administrators, it will say the appropriate discipline has been given following the student handbook. So that means we're aware, we reviewed it, and we put out the proper discipline. We can't share that information. And then the last part would be avoiding disruption. So there are certain things that it's always interesting on how you try to word things sometimes, and I know that the community gets frustrated with that sometimes, but in our defense, some of the situations we're faced with, we're like, how do we say that a particular weapon was found in the school from 1837, right? Like how do you say that without trying to alarm the community? I mean, did that happen? Truly. So it was a historic, it wasn't a musket, it was a small, with a ball on it or whatnot. So trying to explain what that looks like sometimes gets difficult when you're writing. So we're trying to avoid any unnecessary disruption. And then the last one I wanted to chat about was the direct school home communications. This one's really important. Obviously, when you register your children in the York County School Division, we have your phone number, we have your email address and all that other information. That automatically syncs with our systems for how we communicate to you. So obviously phone, email, text message. So those are the three I'll start with. It's important to note that we have more than 200 phone numbers, more than 3,400 text numbers, and more than 300 email addresses that have opted out from receiving communications from us.
You said 200.
What did I say?
2,000.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was 2,000 phone numbers. So we have 13,200 kids. We have 2,000 people who've opted out from their phone numbers and receiving these messages, 3,400 text messages, thank you, Jim, and more than 300 email addresses. So, I try not to look at social media, quite honestly, but what's shared with me is parents in the community will go on there and say, what are you talking about? I didn't receive this. No one told me. So, and I'm going to get to what my request is later in this, but you have to understand your child's school, your responsibility to have your child in a school, you have to do a couple things, obviously. One, sign the student code of conduct and handbook. That's part of the law. The other one is the school is trying to contact you related to a situation at your school. So if you want to opt back into these things, you can do that. Please contact your school and we'll help provide directions for how to do that. And again, I talked about the YCSD app earlier. Hopefully, did we have the QR code somewhere for folks?
Out at the table.
Yeah, that we have some information out there at the table. If you don't have the app, I would highly recommend you use that. Let's see. The next one is slide 24. So again, our goal in an actual emergency information is to try to share information within 15 minutes. And quite honestly, that's a lofty goal depending on the information that we have. So there is some criteria, so I think it's important for parents and community members to understand what that criteria is. First of all, that there's a credible threat to students and staff members in the building. Second, that there's an interruption to the school's daily routine. And then the last one is, there's a high level of discussion, inquiry or rumor or misinformation. Like the examples that we started with, there were issues and concerns about rumors and whatnot. So we had, I think Miss Anthony sent out a communication and a few of our other principals sent them out related to social media, because one was from the UK, one was from Colorado, one from Arkansas, and one from Williamsburg. So we had 4 situations that clearly disrupted our community, but we felt the need that we needed to communicate those. So with that, we've talked a little bit about the recent YSPO investigations. I'll turn it back over to the sheriff to discuss those.
All right, I can't go into specifics, but these are the schools that so far this year have threats have come out that have warranted some type of investigation. One of them from Tab High School resulted in charges, which there was some media information about that. So everyone in the room needs to understand, like we've all been talking about all evening long, we take each and every threat seriously. So when it gets communicated to us, either through the school or parents contact us and let us know they've seen these things. And I'll be honest, last year there was multiple times where the first information we got was from parents monitoring their own kids' cell phones. And a couple of cases where the parents called us and said, I just saw this on my son's iPad or my daughter's cell phone. They're talking about shooting up a school. And that starts an investigation. But in each and every one of these cases, they're very detailed investigations. We believe from the very beginning that there's something to it until we prove otherwise. I get calls or questions all the time in the community is, how do you know it's not a credible threat? Well, we obviously investigate it very thoroughly, and when we interview the parents and we interview the kids, then that's how we're able to make these determinations so quickly. And that's the last part of this investigation I want to talk about. It's really important, if we're going to get a thorough investigation and determine whether or not it's credible or not, is to have the cooperation of the families involved with this. If your child saw a threat online, it's important that we get to talk to that person, your child, to be able to find out which social media site did they see it on? What was exactly said? Did they take a picture of it? Did they repost something? These are details that the quicker we get them, the faster we can determine, is this really a credible threat? Are one of the schools really in danger? And there have been times where we go to the house and we don't get that type of cooperation, which slows the investigation down and makes us then have to start to assume certain facts, which I don't like for us to do. So please talk to your kids about the fact that if they see something, say something. If your parents, we talked about this earlier in the slides, the first place you should be calling if you see something that makes you believe that some school or somebody is in danger in the York County School Division, call 911. That's the fastest way to get this started, but expect that when you do that, one of my people is going to show up and start to ask some questions. So if we have access to your son or daughter that saw this, it's really important that we have the opportunity to sit down and talk with them. Thanks for that cooperation.
Thank you, and I believe I have the last 3 slides. So we did want to share some of the challenges that we face. You heard the sheriff talk about this earlier, students saying or posting threatening statements as jokes. The time, energy, and resources first of all, that go into investigating these is pretty unbelievable. But more importantly, the anxiousness and the worry that it causes kids and causes parents and families is even worse. So these things are not jokes. If I can tell you one thing tonight, it's talk to your kids when you get home. Talk to them about their phone. Talk to them about those things. I said the message again at the board meeting on Monday night. The other challenge we face, students reposting on social media or resharing via text messaging. Those were the examples we shared with you earlier. That's a serious challenge for us and for law enforcement. Families not sharing information with the sheriff's office or the school division staff. That's a problem. That really, we need parents to share information. We need students to share information. We really focus on relationships in our schools. We really try to have all of our staff members, and we want our students to have a go-to adult at the school so that they are comfortable sharing information. So, that's critical for us. Families posting or sharing rumors on social media. That's another issue that happens quite a bit. It's either, and it's not just the students. We have parents who post or repost misinformation, and that does not help us, does not help the sheriff's office. Potential threats being reported to school staff after hours via voicemail, email, social media messaging. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and I know that the sheriff just mentioned this one. Families reporting yet refusing to cooperate with the sheriff's office or the school division. That really slows things down for us in trying to get to the bottom of finding something non-credible. Obviously, call 911. That's deliberately on that slide for a reason. Next, incidents occurring outside of the school being treated as a school matter. And I think that's something that's extremely important. Of all of the information that we shared tonight, a lot of the social media things, one, they happened outside of our schools. A number of them. Two, they happened outside of our school division. Three, they happened outside of our state, and one was outside of our country. So it's extremely important that we're accurate in our communications, what that information looks like. And then last but not least, families not supporting appropriate levels of school discipline. Remember, making a threat on a campus or on someone in the school is not a joke, and no one clearly takes it as that. I mentioned this earlier. YPSO is staffed 24 hours a day. Please make sure that if something comes to you that you report it to them. Last but not least, I won't spend a lot of time on the slide. These statements here are in the Student Code of Conduct, and it just talks about parental responsibilities. So I would ask our community members and parents to please review those. And then last but not least, how can you help? And this is a message that I shared at the board meeting as well. Talk to your children about the seriousness of making threatening comments. Talk to your children about what they can and what they cannot bring to school. Talk to your children about their use on social media and their phone. If you own firearms, make sure they're safely and securely stored so that your children cannot access them. And then last but not least, in the event of an emergency, rely on official updates from the school division and the sheriff's office. We've worked really hard with our staff members, regardless of their position in the school division, that our staff members do not speak for the school division. Ms. Goff, who is our communications person, she speaks for the school division, or I speak for the school division, or Dr. Carroll. And then the one that gets our anxiety up the highest is these rumors. Avoid rumors. If you see those things, please have discussions with your kids about those, or please report those to school officials or the sheriff's office. And this causes confusion, and it certainly causes fear. Thank you so much for your time. I can't thank you enough for being here this evening. At this point in the evening, we will open it up to questions.
When a child or student, regardless of what grade level, are being bullied, there are emotional issues, how do we address those actually within the school?
No, that's a good question. So whenever we get an actual report, the law requires that we, within 24 hours of getting notice from someone that there's a student that potentially is the victim of a bullying situation, we notify the parents. We also have to make sure we work with our school staff, our school counselors are, and our school buildings, as well as our administrators. We investigate, we look into things, but in addition to that, we talk about supportive measures. Because while they're doing the investigation, we're required to make sure there's some type of supportive interventions that are put in place. It might be a check-in, check-out with a trusted adult. It might be that we look at schedules and different things to make some adjustments to make sure that child is in a good place while we're trying to conclude the investigation. And then when they finish, even if, let's say that it's not bullying, let's say it's just pure conflict, we offer such things as peer mediation to work with the students, but we work very closely with the families to try to make sure we're addressing the issue. And yes, sometimes discipline is applied if it is a true bullying situation, and they have been warned and they've been counseled not to engage in behaviors, then there's unfortunately a disciplinary consequence that's put in place on the person that is perpetrating the situation.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Hi. Dr. Carroll, you mentioned the number of cameras that we have throughout the school division. So my question is, does that include every exterior door on our division buildings? And also, can you, Dr. Butler, maybe explain for our families with students with disabilities how a threat assessment would take that into consideration so that there's transparency for those families?
I'll take the camera one first. I'm not sure if we've got a camera on every door. I would say most are definitely, but certainly anyone that would have a badging access will. And I can double check that, but I believe that's the case.
And that's a good question about threat assessment teams. So as I shared before, the state requires that we have someone with mental health background as well as administration, law enforcement. The other component they put is someone with an instructional background. So if it is a student with a disability, normally that student's case manager, who should have a good understanding of the child's disability, how it impacts their behavior, is a part of that team. So as they begin doing their evaluation and questions, they will take that into account as part of the assessment.
I know you stated that there are school resource officers and security officers at our middle schools and our high schools. Why are there no security officers or resource officers at our elementary schools? Why was the decision made to not have presence in our elementary schools?
So when we started this process of putting officers in the school, when I got here in 2014, we had 4 school resource officers. They were all at the high school. And I believe at that time, Kyle, I don't remember if the resource officers actually went to the middle schools, if there was an issue, or went to them, or if it was a road deputy at the time that did. So we've certainly made progress when it comes to that. By adding the 4 at the middle school and then adding the school security officers, when it comes to the elementary schools, when I had discussions with the sheriff's office, we talked about what that staffing would look like. There's also there's a few things to consider when it comes to staffing elementary schools with school resource officers. In discussions with the sheriff, I know he's 7 deputies short now, correct? Like you're 6-7 deputies short now. So when he's having a hard time staffing just the sheriff's office, just having the staff members available for those positions can be a challenge. I'll turn it over to you for the rest.
And I'll expand on that a little bit. School resource officers is not a position that you would want to hire someone brand new that had no prior law enforcement experience. Generally with us, they've got anywhere from 2 years and above before they express an interest in wanting to do that, and there's training that goes along with it as well. We have 10 elementary schools in York County. So that would mean that right now, if by chance tomorrow we got the funding to put 10 people in there, that I would have to be able to hire 10 people to replace the road deputies that I'm trying to catch up with right now that were behind the curve because of the number of calls for service we have. So it would take us a while to be able to do that. That's why we started the program a year ago where the road deputies are at the elementary schools on a regular basis during the daytime. Now, they're not there all the time, but sometimes they can be there for extended periods of time depending on the call volume. But essentially right now, with 10 elementary schools, it would be a staffing issue that would take some time to phase in.
Is that in process? Are you looking to phase that in?
Well, the first part of it would be that we would have to get the funding to do that. So just to give you some information on it, to hire a patrol deputy is what's essentially what you're talking about right now, is about $200,000 in the first year up your cost. But that's the salary, benefits, the training, and the equipment that goes with it. So it's about a $2 million process to hire 10 people. We just hired 8 last year, trying to get to the numbers on the patrol. I will be asking for additional people in this year's budget, Mr. Roan. And when we do that, the more people I get on the street, then the more opportunities there are for the deputies to be in the elementary schools on a regular basis. But I know that there have been some discussions, and we're going to continue to have those discussions, but we would need to understand that it would be a phase-in process to put 10 people in the elementary schools at one time. We do have one individual right now that's in the DARE program, that he's in the elementary schools on a regular basis. Now they moves back and forth between semesters. It's 5 in the first semester and 5 in the second. And when he's not teaching DARE on those days during the school, he is rotating between elementary schools. So between the road deputies and that deputy, we're getting pretty good coverage, or at least a whole lot better than it was in the past.
Then this is for the good of the group. And I'm only going to just say metal detectors, because I know that is a very hot topic.
I mean, we can certainly have the conversation around metal detectors. There's a number of pros and cons to the metal detectors. I know that there's schools who have implemented them, and I think the biggest thing you don't want to do there, at least lessons learned from other superintendents, is a knee-jerk reaction to putting metal detectors in place at schools. Because to me, and I think some of the research out there that we've read and some of our peers that we've talked to, yes, they can be a deterrence, detection, and provide some reassurance, but just as that, they could also be potential false sense of security. And the impact on the climate there. So because you put them in front of your school, some of your staff members and kids might be more afraid or scared. And when you think about the logistical piece to those, again, I'm not saying I'm for them or against them. I'm just trying to put some things out there for you to consider and think through. It's not just about putting them in front of the school and have single access to the school. Like all the kids are going to come in one way at the Grafton complex, right? The building's 300,000 square feet, okay? So we have those, but there's a number of other doors around the school at a high school. So you really need to think about, are they there all day? When volunteers come, when late students come, when a substitute comes, are they still going to go through those there? Who's going to man them? Who's going to be trained in them? All those types of things. I think about a high school PE class at a particular high school that instead of going right out to the back of the school at York High School or Grafton, we're going to walk those kids all the way to the front of the school, come out, walk all the way to the back of the school for PE, come back in, and go through the metal detectors again. So there's a lot of things to think about, I think, when it comes to the metal detectors. Again, I don't have a position of for or against, but I've seen some implementation, and I know some superintendents who have some heartburn over putting them in. So, and I think it's important to think about what does that make our community look like if you put those in all the schools. And again, I haven't received an email really about metal detectors at all, to be honest with you. I think you may have received one, but I don't know if the sheriff or anyone at the sheriff's office has any comments about metal detectors as well. Because we use them at games, we also use them in schools when we have a situation. Our SROs use the wands and whatnot for searches.
The interesting conversation that I've had recently, and with peers, not just in this area, but around the country, that law enforcement has asked school divisions is, if you're that concerned about putting them in schools, why aren't they on the bus? And I mean, who's going to do that? I mean, that's the whole issue. I mean, if you're really going to talk about 100% security and what you could possibly do, then you would start with, how do they get to school? And if they're riding buses, that would seem to be the logical place to start with metal detectors, but nobody's talked about that. So I have reached out to agencies that have experienced an active shooter event and what they did afterwards. And there's even mixed feelings in the law enforcement community about the effectiveness of metal detectors and whether or not just putting a metal detector at the front door is enough. The question is, then you're going to seal the other windows? What are the other access points, as Dr. Shandor talked about? What happens with the nighttime activities when you have other people coming into the building for other reasons? Are they all going to be doing the same thing? So once you start down that road, it's not as simple as simply buying them and putting them at the front door. There's staff training. How many hours are you going to devote to that? How does it impact the academic workday? What happens after school? So if we're going to do that, if we really start to have that conversation, there's an awful lot of things that go into having a successful program for that.
There was a conversation earlier as far as communication, and I know you said that you're not on social media, but I've seen the posts where parents say, you know, they get inundated and so they opt out. Is there any way to differentiate so that safety communication goes to everyone and there's not the opt-in ability, but if someone, I think where some of the disconnect, at least from people that I know personally, is a lot of times we'll get email communication and the voice message. So when they opt out, they don't understand that outside of everything. So is there a way to differentiate so that everyone's getting safety messages?
Yeah, I think the part of that is it's the program that we use. The programs and the systems that we use sort of dictate how that works. We do change as we communicate. There's some messages that, again, timing's everything, whether or not it's going to be in writing or it's going to be an email or a text or the principal's voice. There's certain messages that we want you to hear the principal's voice. We want the community to hear, whether it's Aaron McQuillan or whether it's Candace Welch or whether it's Barbara Nagel, we want you to hear the principal's voice. Other times we may not have time to record that because she's in the middle of, or he is in the middle of working through some type of investigation. I would be honest with you, we can certainly look into that, but as a professional for 31 years, I would guess that a lot of people in here get a lot of emails from a lot of different companies. I just can't even think, why would you not want to get the communication from your child's school? So my recommendation would be, please opt in so you know you're going to get that information. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Any feedback that you have for us, please send me a direct email or send it through Let's Talk. Either way, and we'll take that feedback and try to improve our program next year. Again, if you see something, please share it. If your kids, if you have concerns about anything, please contact the schools. If you have an emergency, call 911. Get us involved as fast as possible. Thank you so much for being here.